Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Space Force has officially welcomed its first part-time service members, launching a first-of-its-kind personnel model that allows Guardians to move between full-time and part-time service without transferring to the National Guard or Reserves. Service leaders say the approach will help recruit and retain skilled workers, particularly those with expertise in the commercial space and technology sectors. But the new model also raises questions about how the military will manage a more flexible workforce and whether its aging personnel systems are ready to support it. Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen joins me now with more details. Rachel, great to have you.
Hello, Terry.
So what exactly makes the Space Force's new part-time service model different from how the other military branches manage their reserve forces?
So, I think Brigadier General Matthew Holston, he's the program office head who's overseeing kind of the technical side of combining these components. I think he says it really well in this clip.
So what's really great about the Personnel Management Act, it introduced a new term called a service without component for the United States Space Force. What it really means, we're going to break down the barrier that currently exists between an active component and a reserve component. And it's combined, often you'll hear folks refer to it as a single component service, meaning we're going to break down those barriers and now there's just one component or a single component or service where there's a common organizational structure, common culture for the Guardians that are serving in that. And you just have the ability to serve in either a full-time or a part-time capacity.
Yeah, so most people, are familiar with the three component structure, right? So active duty, guard, and reserve. And so the Space Force said, how can we kind of smush this down, make it just one, and make it easier, bureaucratically, less red tape for people, make it more, flexible because life happens. And so, that's their top personnel initiative. And so now we get to see if it works.
It sounds pretty ambitious. Why do they think this approach will help with recruiting and retention, especially for these highly technical jobs?
So the Space Force depends really heavily on, people with cyber experience, people with, the very technical kind of space operations background, acquisition background, and, you get those people from industry. And so I think one piece of it is on the recruiting side, I think saying to somebody, hey, you can come in and it's not as big of a lift if you want to, go to industry and take a cool fellowship. We want you to keep your skills current, something like that. If your parent gets sick, saying it's fine, like you can take, 6 months, work part-time. You only have to come in for 2 weeks during that stretch. I think people would appreciate that flexibility, and that's kind of what they're banking on the recruiting side. And then on the retention side, right, if you have a job that affords you that kind of flexibility, they're gambling that people are going to want to stay in uniform longer, because it's not either you're in uniform or you're out, or you're active duty and you have a full-time job all the time, or you're part-time and, you have to switch back and forth.
So, Rachel, are there particular requirements or credentials that get you into this kind of special status?
Yeah, so right now, the only real requirement is that you have come in as somebody who is in a part-time Air Force job already. So the people who are transferring in are Air National Guardsmen, Air Force reservists who were already in space-related jobs. Unclear right now, how quickly people that are current active duty Guardians in the Space Force, if and when they will get the ability to go part-time. So if you're coming in as a person who is already, a part-timer because you're in the Guard or Reserve, you continue as a part-timer in the Space Force. And federal law requires that those people serve for at least 14 days a year and participate in at least 48 scheduled drills or training periods. If you can't do that, you could be on, more of a full-time active duty role for training for up to 30 days.
So when we say part-time, we're not thinking 20 hours a week like a half-time job. We're thinking periodic segments of performance, right?
Yep.
More like a a person who's in the National Guard or Reserve.
Right. So it's, at the heart of it, it's really just, how can we, the Space Force is saying, how can we cut this red tape? How can we have people kind of switch back and forth and open those career opportunities and family opportunities for them, while keeping in mind that, there are personnel requirements, right? There are mission requirements. And so they have to have some way of being able to plan, but not only having people come in, 10 or 20 hours a week.
Got it. But not everybody's sold on this idea, right? What complaints do the critics raise?
Yeah, there's been a lot of fighting over the last several years about whether to create a Space National Guard or not. Just kind of copy-paste the model that all the other services use onto the Space Force. The Space Force's argument has always been, that's too much bureaucracy. We're not that big of a service. The cost of creating a Space National Guard, would be, higher because of signage and just, all the trappings of creating a new organization. It would be more expensive. And they said, look, we don't think that we need something separate. And so, folks on the Hill, especially those who have space units in their districts, Mike Rogers on HASC, et cetera, very big proponents of creating a Space National Guard because, they wanted those resources. They saw it as the way to kind of beef up space capabilities more than, what they thought kind of a single component, quote unquote, situation would be.
Even as Space Force is intent on getting this program underway, you report that there's still some technical hurdles to this. What's keeping this program from really scaling?
Yeah, so, each component of a service has its own separate HR IT system. So, they're trying to wrangle all of these people across, one Space Force IT system and then the Air Force Reserve IT system and then the Air National Guard IT system. So, those don't always play nicely with each other. And so that creates hurdles to, perhaps doing this in larger batches or taking the current, quote unquote, full-time active duty Space Force Guardians and allowing them to be part-time. So, there's some kinks that they have to work out just in terms of what data each system can see, all of that kind of thing. So it just fits into sort of the larger IT modernization, that's needed department-wide.
That's Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen. Rachel, thanks for bringing us this story. It'll be interesting to watch how it plays out.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry.
You can find Rachel's story at federalnewsnetwork.com.